Teletubbies is one of the most successful children's shows in television history. And there's a conspiracy theory, one that's racked up millions of views on YouTube and TikTok, claiming it was secretly inspired by 4 abused children in a Bulgarian mental institution. It is completely, verifiably false. But the story of how it spread and why so many people believed it turns out to be more disturbing than the theory itself. So let's start with what Teletubbies actually is. On March 31st, 1997, the BBC introduced the world to 4 brightly colored characters living in a futuristic dome on rolling green hills. Tinky Winky, Dipsy, Laa-Laa, and Po. They communicated mostly in gibberish, had television screens embedded in their stomachs, and were watched over by a giggling baby son. Within months, they'd captured 2 million viewers per episode. Ann Wood and Andrew Davenport created the show through Ragdoll Productions, a company Wood had founded in 1984, and by any measure, it became a juggernaut. The franchise pulled in over $1.6 billion in merchandise sales by the year 2000. A single based on the theme song hit #1 on the UK singles chart in December 1997 and sold over 1 million copies. Eventually, the show broadcast in 120 countries and was translated into 45 languages. The Daily Telegraph called it the most lucrative show in BBC television history. Here's the thing about Teletubbies, though. It's weird. Genuinely, intentionally, profoundly strange. Tinky Winky stands 10 feet tall. The characters live in a landscape with no other humans. They repeat actions and phrases obsessively, and there's no backstory, no explanation for where they came from or why they exist. That void, that deliberate absence of narrative context, became a blank canvas for the internet. On May 30th, 2013, a user named Scarlet Siren posted a story on Quotev, a creative writing platform. It was structured as a conspiracy theory, and it went like this. The Teletubbies weren't invented by television producers. They were based on 4 real children from a Bulgarian institution for the mentally disabled, a place supposedly known as Laa-Laa Land. Each character, the theory claimed, corresponded to a specific child and a specific form of abuse. Laa-Laa, the yellow one, represented a child kept in isolation for years, left with permanent facial disfigurement. Tinky Winky was based on a deaf child who'd been tied to a fence outside and developed frostbite, which explained the blue-purple coloring. Dipsy was inspired by a malnourished child so neglected he'd lain in his own vomit for days. And Po, the red Teletubby, was based on a child who had fallen into a fire and burned. The theory also offered an explanation for those television screens on the characters' bellies. According to the story, TVs were the only source of joy for the children in the institution. When staff tried to remove them, the children swallowed the smaller sets to keep them close. All 4 children, the story claimed, died on the same day in 1995. This was posted to Quotev as a creepypasta, a genre of internet horror fiction that originated on 4chan around 2007. The name is a play on copypasta, meaning blocks of text that go viral through copying and pasting. Creepypastas are by definition made up. They're user-generated horror stories designed to unsettle readers, usually by reframing something familiar and innocent as something nightmarish. That's the entire point of the genre. But context has a way of evaporating on the internet. The theory sat relatively dormant for years before gaining serious traction. In 2019, the YouTuber Most Amazing Top 10 included it in a video called Top 10 Scary Teletubbies Theories, which pulled over 1.4 million views. Then it migrated to TikTok, where a video from the Scarecast accumulated nearly 750,000 likes and close to 9,000 comments. At each stage of the journey, the theory shed another layer of its fictional origins. By the time most people encountered it, there was no mention of Quotev, no mention of creepypasta, no acknowledgement that someone had simply made it up. So let's do what the viral posts never did and actually examine the claims. The institution doesn't exist. There has never been a mental health facility for children in Bulgaria called Laa-Laa Land. Not in any records, not in any documentation, nowhere. The timeline doesn't work either. The theory claims the children died in 1995 and inspired the show, which premiered in 1997. But the development of Teletubbies is extensively documented. Ann Wood and Andrew Davenport developed the concept after visiting the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, where Davenport was struck by how astronauts in their suits resembled toddlers in nappies. That observation, combined with their interest in how young children were navigating the increasingly technological world of the late 1990s, became the foundation of the show. The original character designs came from illustrator Jonathan Hills, whose widow presented a collection of his original drawings on Antiques Roadshow in 2022, where they were valued at up to £80,000. Davenport also explained the TV screens directly. The BBC's brief required the inclusion of live-action footage of real children. But since Tinky Winky stood 8.5 feet tall, having actual children on set alongside the Teletubbies would have been terrifying. So Davenport put screens on their bellies. He was entertained, he said, by the idea that the Teletubbies watched children on their screens with the same fascination that children watch Teletubbies on theirs. And Ann Wood has been unequivocal about the show's intent. She described it as an antidote to violent children's programming like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. She wanted the central event of each episode to be a big hug. She wanted children to feel secure and loved. Here's where the theory gets its teeth, though, and why it's worth taking seriously as a cultural phenomenon, even while being completely fictional. It works because it borrows from something real. In 2007, the BBC aired a documentary called Bulgaria's Abandoned Children, made by filmmaker Kate Blewett. It exposed conditions at the Mogalino Institution in northern Bulgaria, where children with physical and mental disabilities face shocking neglect. At the time, Bulgaria had more institutionalized disabled children than anywhere else in Europe. The documentary triggered an international outcry and, combined with pressure from the EU, led to Mogalino's closure in October 2009. The critical detail is the date. That documentary aired in 2007, a full decade after Teletubbies had already premiered. The real abuses in Bulgarian institutions couldn't have inspired a show that already existed. But the creepypasta took the emotional weight of those real horrors and grafted them onto a fictional narrative, mixing truth with invention in exactly the way that makes misinformation stick. And this isn't even the first time Teletubbies attracted this kind of projection. Back in 1999, Reverend Jerry Falwell declared in his National Liberty Journal that Tinky Winky was a gay role model because the character was purple, carried a red purse, and had a triangle-shaped antenna. The BBC's official response was beautifully deadpan. Tinky Winky, they said, is simply a sweet technological baby with a magic bag. In 2007, a Polish government official launched an actual investigation into the character's supposed homosexuality. Something about this show's strangeness invites projection. Its deliberate simplicity, its refusal to explain itself, the surreal emptiness of Tubbyland. People look at it and see whatever unsettles them most. The Bulgarian Asylum theory is fiction. It was always fiction, labeled as horror fan fiction from the moment it was created. But it traveled millions of miles from that original context. And by the time it reached most viewers, it had become something that felt true. Something that seemed to explain the inexplicable weirdness of a show that 2 million toddlers once watched every single day, And that might be the genuinely disturbing part. Not that someone wrote a dark story about a children's show, but that the internet strips context from content with ruthless efficiency, and that millions of people will share something horrifying without ever once asking where it actually came from.